That is how Muslim women have to live, whether we are in Afghanistan, whether we are in Iran, whether we are in Canada, America, Sweden, Italy, France. This is our life. This is how we have to survive. We're not talking about Islamist countries. We're not talking about theocracies. We're talking about Islam. We're talking about Muslims. And we're talking about this being a worldwide problem. And until people like you are willing to admit that, acknowledge that, and speak up against that, then we're only going to continue only hearing the voices of the extremists, and they're always going to be the ones that are going to be the tail that wags the dog, and they're always going to be the ones with the microphones, right? We're never going to get to see you. We don't hear your voices. We don't see you doing anything other than just dismissing those guys and saying, they're not real Muslims. That's not helpful. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Yasmine Mohammed podcast. Today, my guest is Paul Armstrong. Paul is a British Muslim leader, a multi-faith advocate, and a public speaker. In 1998, his personal quest for meaning led him to explore various faith traditions, culminating in his decision to embrace Islam on the 1st of March, 2000. Paul, welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you, Yasmine.
Nice to meet you too. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, you mentioned back in 1998, I started looking into spiritual traditions, mainly because I've always been quite good at science and understanding the how things are, but it was the why that kind of interested me. So, I've been questioning things for a very long time, and that process led me to embrace Islam, and it led me to where I am now. And I've never stopped.
I want to get into that. I want to get into that for sure. So let's start at the beginning. Why don't you tell us about your childhood? What part did religion play in your life growing up?
Well, I grew up in a open-minded household. My parents were privately, they had spiritual beliefs, so they did believe in something, but they were sort of agnostically spiritual, if that makes any sense. They were not
Yep,
agnostic in the
definitely.
sense that they didn't believe that there was a God of some kind or a creator, but they were agnostic in terms of religions. Although when it comes to forms, they always put C of E on forms, which is short for Church of England. But they weren't really Anglicans as such. They both, my parents had their own beliefs and were sort of free-thinking spiritual people.
So what made you start, because you said that you studied all bunch of different religions, studied a whole bunch of different texts before you landed on Islam. What made you start to go down that path?
I mean, I've always had kind of more of a scientific approach to things. I've been quite good with the understanding how things are, but it was the why, that really, I was more interested in why. Why are things the way they are? I look deeper into things. So, of course, that naturally caused me to gravitate to spirituality, to philosophy, to religions. And I had an interest in that. Various Christian groups tried to appeal to me to join their congregations, but Christianity never really resonated with me. In fact, it took me to embrace Islam and many years being a Muslim to kind of make my peace with Christianity. But which I have, and I'm glad I have now. But it's an interesting one. I've looked into different spiritual traditions, different religions, different religious texts, and this is something which is ongoing. I've always had an interest in religious scriptures, so even now I still connect them, and I still like to look at what different religious scriptures say on things. I find it fascinating. Not just the official ones either, but even like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi text, that these kind of scriptures that didn't make it into the orthodox forms of religion, but nonetheless exist, and they hold an importance in the history of the development of spiritual traditions.
So what is it specifically? Because if you were studying Islam, then you would have learned about how it condones wife beating, how it condones marital rape, it condones sex slavery, child marriage, anti-Semitism, execution of homosexuals, execution of free thinkers like me. You studied all these texts and you said, this is the religion, this is the one, this is the winner.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I disagree that that is actually what Islam teaches on those things. But and I'm not alone. I mean, there's very well established mainstream Muslim authorities in different countries that disagree with that. But I can
Sure. Well,
understand.
Muslims and
Yeah, I can
Islam are
understand
two
why you'd
completely
say that.
different
Yeah.
things. Yeah. So the scripture of Islam, so Arabic is my first language, and I read the
Mm,
Quran in Arabic, and what it says in the text is one thing. The way 2 billion Muslims practice the religion is as varied as, 2 billion different ways. But
yeah.
the religion itself does very clearly condone wife beating, marital rape, sex slavery, anti-Semitism, killing of homosexuals, killing of free thinkers like me. You know this. If you've studied the ahadith and
What
if you've
the thing
studied the
is,
Quran, then you know that these verses exist. And you know that those verses are the
mm,
reason why countries that are run by Sharia execute homosexuals, execute free thinkers, treat women like second-class citizens, throw them in prison over not wearing hijab. You know that the reason why Muslims act like that is based on their scripture. So what I'm asking you
well,
is, when you read
firstly,
these
mm,
texts, what made you gravitate towards this religion when you're reading what this religion is condoning?
yeah, I hear the question, and I respect your perspective on this, but I obviously share a different one. Otherwise, I would not be a Muslim now. Now, when you say religious texts, first thing, the Quran is the book of Islam. When you have a background from a Muslim
Yeah.
heritage as well, so you know that. And then you've got hadiths. Now, hadiths are supplementary texts. They are not really the religious texts. They are supplementary
Well,
texts.
when
So
you
the
say the
importance.
Shahada, you say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. So if you're a Sunni Muslim,
Mm,
then and
I'm
Sharia
not.
law
I
are
don't
based
reject
on
hadith.
both.
I don't
Okay,
reject hadith, but you have to let me answer the question.
go ahead.
But they are supplementary texts, and the hadith themselves, they vary in terms of their veracity and reliability. And I'm not the
That's
person
right.
saying this. You know, Imam Bukhari, Imam
No, I
Malik,
understand what Sahih
Imam
Hadith
Muslim,
are.
yeah, exactly. And they
I'm
themselves questioned,
familiar.
yeah, they themselves question the veracity of various hadith traditions. And it can be questioned based on the isnad and even on the meaning, even if the isnad, the chain of narration, the chain of transmission is looks good. But if the meaning doesn't make sense and it's out of sync with the whole body of what is Islamic text and with the Quran, then you can't follow that. That's not something that's prescriptive, that is something which is advocated within Islam.
So
Now,
when you're studying,
when you say Islam advocates for these things or Islam teaches things, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about Nahdlatul Ulama? Are we talking about Dar al-Iftar in Egypt?
well, you
Are
see
we
this,
talking
what I'm
about
asking you is,
Al-Azhar
Paul,
University?
you've gone off
Are
on a
you?
tangent.
I'm not
So
really
what
because
I was asking you
yeah.
is, when you were first studying the religion, so when you were first studying the religion, I'm not asking you about now, 25 years later, that you're a Muslim, when you
Hmm.
can have all of these,
Well,
apologetics that you can refer to. I'm
when
asking
I
about when you
first
first were attracted to the religion, were you unaware of these texts, or were you
well,
aware of the
some
texts
of
and
them.
immediately aware of the fact that they can be interpreted in different ways and that you could cherry pick them out? Or how was it
Hmm.
that you could read these texts and still choose the religion? That's the thing that I have so much trouble
Well,
understanding.
going back to what I was originally saying, is that it was reading the Quran that drew me to Islam. So when I was reading the Quran, obviously some of these things are in Hadith, which came into my studies much later. And I'm aware there are a few things in the Quran that are very much in the context of the times that it was written in. And also the interpretations that some people hold are very much in the times at which it was written in. And some of these things can be interpreted in very different, yet nonetheless authentic ways. So for instance, you mentioned about wife beating. The word in the Quran, daraba, can mean different things. It doesn't
No, it
necessarily mean
can't
that.
mean different things, Paul. It
Well,
cannot mean different things.
I've got this from
Daraba is
theologians
still
who
a
are,
word that we use in colloquial Arabic. It's not like an ancient language. It's not one of those ancient words. The Quran does have some words that are obsolete
it
now.
is. It is
But
1500 year
daraba
old
is a word that
Arabic.
we
I mean,
daraba is a
if you think
word
about
that
it,
we
I mean, if you
use
look at
today.
English,
I
yeah, but
understand.
if you look at
Listen, that's
English,
really condescending what you're doing now. Okay. Let me tell you again.
mm,
Arabic is my first language, and I'm telling
mm,
you that the word daraba is used in colloquial Arabic every day all around the world. You can go
mm,
back to Old English and you can find that there are still words that were used back then that we still use today. Not all of them. As I mentioned, the Quran has
mm.
lots of words that are obsolete, that we do not use anymore. Daraba is not one of those words. Daraba very clearly means
We
to
use
hit.
words, yeah. Look, we use words, and I'm not trying to be condescending at all, but words, they change in their meaning over time. I mean, the English language, if you go back just 500 years ago, we were talking Shakespeare's English. Now, the Quran is written in classical
So
Arabic,
what do
which
you
is
think
1500
daraba
years old.
means? What do you think daraba means?
Daraba, in this particular context, I believe it means to separate. You know, it doesn't
Okay.
necessarily mean to hit. I take that.
Yadrabuhunna means to separate them.
Yeah, I don't believe it means that you should strike.
Okay.
But I mean,
So if it's three,
even if it did, let's
mm-hmm.
move on from that, because the thing is, it's like we can get too focused on a particular thing. Even if it did mean that, I mean, the Quran, like any religious text, is also a product of its times. There are many things that you could find in the Bible or any other religious text which you wouldn't necessarily implement in
You can't make
exactly the
that
ways that.
comparison though, because the
Well,
Bible is not
you
the
can.
literal word of God as opposed to the Quran is the literal word of Allah.
Well,
But I want to go back to your assertion.
ask some religious Christians on that, and they will tell you that
Okay.
the Bible is
So
the word of God. So, I mean, it
let's go
depends,
back to your
you know.
assertion that it means to separate, because I want to ask you, what are the three stages? Tell me what the three steps are that men are supposed to do if they fear disobedience or arrogance from their wives. What are the three steps? The third one being to separate. So what are the first and second?
Well, first, you should try and talk things over with your spouse, and you
Uh-huh.
know, try to understand what's gone wrong and try to mediate. You know,
Right.
and then if that doesn't work, then you
Yeah.
have to separate. You don't
Okay. So then
you
you're
know.
saying separate is step two and step three?
I'm not saying that, but the thing is, you're putting
Okay.
words in my
Okay,
mouth.
so go ahead and tell me, what is step two? You said it's to separate. So what is step three? You also said it's to separate. So you explain to me how Allah is
No,
giving
first,
three steps and the last two are exactly the same.
I'm not saying that, but you.
Go ahead and tell me what you're saying then.
No, what I'm saying is that firstly,
The three steps. What are the three steps?
you talk about these things, and then if that doesn't work, then you seek mediation, and then if that doesn't
No,
work, then you separate.
no,
Well,
no.
it's a you can
That's
have a
not
different
what
opinion on this, but the thing is,
it's not a difference of opinion. It's you just change you just pivoted from what you had said originally because you realized that that doesn't make any sense. What you said originally was true. The first step is to talk to her, and the second, well, it's to admonish her, actually. The second
Yeah.
step is to separate. That is true. And the third step is to hit her. And you know that. You know that, Paul. That's
No,
why you're
I don't
refusing
agree
now
with
to
that interpret.
accept.
No, I
So
don't
it
agree with that
means,
interpretation. But that's fine. I mean, we don't have to agree on everything.
okay, so second and third step are both to separate. Okay. So what about the sex slaves?
Look, like I said, the Quran is a book that was a product of its times. The Quran does not advocate slavery, any form of slavery. But at the same time, it was written in a time when slavery was the bedrock of, it was the foundation of society. It was quite normal. And that was quite normal in around the world until
Making
the
sex
British Empire
slaves
came into
was never normal.
it, until the
I
British
would
Empire
respect
came
you
along
more
and
if you
sent the Royal
said,
Navy, you know, to
I would
started
respect you more
stopping
if you were
transatlantic trade.
honest and you said, yes, it does have sex slavery, but I disagree with it. That would be more honest. But to try and pretend that it doesn't condone sex slavery, that's just being
I'm
dishonest.
I'm not being dishonest. What I am saying, and I clearly said, is the Quran has a context, and it was written in a time when slavery was normal. We don't
Okay.
live in a time when slavery is normal. And thank goodness for that. It shouldn't be. I mean, it goes, and there's other things in the Quran which talk about the equality of people, talk about treating people fairly, talk about human dignity, that Allah
Mhm.
has honored all of the children of Adam, which goes against this idea of keeping people as slaves. So the way I see it is it acknowledged the reality of the times. It was trying to reduce that, but then look, also has a path towards a better future where hopefully people can put that sort of thing behind us. But I mean,
Okay.
even after the time of the British Empire, when you had the transatlantic slave trade and the abominations that took place then, and we still have slavery in the modern world. People talk about it today as if it doesn't exist. It's an ongoing thing. I don't know why we still have that in today's world and we haven't been able to stop it. But it's a tragedy of human existence. I think that this exists.
I agree with you. It 100% is a tragedy that it still happens. Um, are you aware of why Saudi Arabia stopped buying and selling Black people as slaves in the 60s?
Well, you're talking about a country, it's a political institution. I mean, that is kind of going off on a bit of a tangent. Um,
I'm
I'm not,
asking you a
no,
question. If you're aware of what made Muslims stop
well, you
selling
mentioned Saudi Arabia.
humans as
I don't know
slaves,
that. I don't know that particular story about Saudi Arabia, so I
it
can't
was the
comment on that particular
Brits.
one.
It was the British people who said, we're not going to help you get the oil out of the ground unless you stop slavery.
Mm.
So that's why it ended. But what I want to talk to you, so we've talked a bit about
Alhamdulillah.
scripture, we've
Mm.
talked about text. Let's talk about the reality of Islam in the world today, in the Islamic regime of Iran, Islamic regime of Afghanistan, countries that are run by Sharia like Saudi Arabia. Let's talk about the reality. Maybe the texts, as you were saying, they can be interpreted in different ways, but let's look at how Muslims are actually practicing their religion. I'm not going to even talk about ISIS, Al Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, Boko Haram, and all of the dozens, hundreds of different terrorist Muslim organizations. Let's just talk about the Muslim theocracies. Let's talk about the Islamic governments. Let's talk about countries that are run by Sharia. Um, why don't you talk to me about that? Talk to me about how you can see how Muslims, how they attacked Salman Rushdie, for example, over his free speech, Charlie Hebdo, the Danish cartoonists, the way Muslims are expressing themselves now with the pro-Palestinian conflict, like the issue in Australia with the two nurses that said that they kill Jewish patients, and they had over 60 Muslim organizations speak up in support of them, in support of the two nurses that said that they kill their patients. How do you feel about the way Muslims are behaving in the world today?
Well, there's 1.61 billion Muslims, so we cannot just generalize 1.61 billion Muslims by the actions of the Taliban or the Iranian regime. And
Okay, so I said I
yeah,
wasn't talking about Taliban and other terrorist
well,
groups. The example that I gave you was in Australia, for example.
Afghanistan is, you mentioned Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is ruled by the Taliban.
That's right. Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
you can answer maybe
that's the reason I mentioned
if
the
you'd
Taliban.
rather not, you can talk, maybe answer me. How do you feel about Muslims,
I would
the way
actually
they're
like to
conducting themselves across the world?
well, Yasmin, I would actually like to talk about this because it is something
Good.
that I am deeply concerned about. I mean, what we're looking at when we look at Afghanistan under the Taliban or Iran, we are looking at Islamist regimes, Islamists,
Mhm.
and that is different from the practice of probably the majority of Muslims internationally, because there's Islam as a religion, and I'm not saying there isn't a political element to that. Of course, there is, but it's quite different to political Islamism, which is set up to take certain things from the religion that it can then use and twist in such a way that it can oppress a population. And that is something which it should be of serious concern. Whatever our beliefs, whether we're free thinkers, whether we're Muslims, whether people are Christians, whatever our beliefs, that is something that should be of serious concern. And from my perspective, and a lot of Muslims' perspective, it goes against a Quranic injunction that we believe is from Allah, that there is no compulsion in religion, and also that you shouldn't be a tyrant. You know, Pharaoh and Nimrod, as he's called in English, were tyrants who oppressed their people. Now, if people oppress in the name of a religion, whether that be Islam or any other religion, if they oppress, they then have the reality of Pharaoh or Nimrod. You know, so it doesn't matter how much people are then saying, oh, I'm Muslim and I'm appealing to Allah. If you are behaving like Firun or like Nimrod, then you are a tyrant. And that is something that is absolutely condemned in the Quran. And that is not something which is, you know, ambiguous. It's very clear.
So you
So it is
condemn the way Afghanistan is treating women, for example, and you condemn
100%. It's
Iran.
disgusting. Yeah.
Good. Okay, that's great. How I understand that you work a lot in Britain and you've got a congregation of people there, and that's great. But how can your work inform, or how can you as an individual reach these extremist Muslims that are tyrants, as you were saying, and I completely agree with you? How can you reach them?
Well, I'm very active on social media, and we also organize events in the UK. So I communicate with people and, you know, try to explain things to them and show how things can be understood from different perspectives. And that there are certain things, as a Muslim, we are supposed to be kind. We're supposed to be understanding. We're supposed to be making things easy for people. And these are things I'm quoting from well-known hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, and how he advised people to conduct themselves. So we certainly shouldn't be going around making things difficult, making problems for people, making things awkward, or worse. And some of these people do a lot worse than that.
I guess what I'm
Um,
asking is, what can your work do to push back against the extremism that's happening all around the world in the name of Islam? So if we would look at these, for example, Iran, what's going on there. So I'll tell you where this is coming from. The example that I gave you of the Australian nurses, for example, and the 60 Muslim organizations, not individuals, organizations. So who knows how many people are behind each organization, all
gosh,
came up in support of these two nurses who said that they kill their Jewish patients. We don't see the
that's
opposite
frightening.
happening,
Yeah.
Paul. We don't see the opposite happening. We don't see Muslim organizations or even Muslim individuals really hardly ever speaking up against the extremists. We only see them speaking up in support. So that's my question is,
Well,
if you
I've
believe
been
these
doing
things,
this.
how
Yeah.
can you express that? How can you get that out there?
Well, I've been doing this for about 15 years, and I know there's a heck of a lot of Muslims who are speaking out against this kind of thing. I mean, a good example is Dr. Tariq Qadri, who actually lives in Canada, and the work that he's done. He wrote a 500-page fatwa against
Okay.
terrorism and suicide bombing.
But we've never
Also,
seen 60 Muslim reform organizations, or we've never seen 60 Muslim organizations come up
well,
and speak
look at
again for peace with Israel, for example. You know, something
Well,
that's
look at the
very,
size of that organization. Minhaj Quran is a huge organization based in Pakistan, but also operating in Britain, in France, a number of European countries, and also in Canada and around the world. If you look at Nahdlatul Ulama is the largest Muslim organization in the world based in Indonesia. And
but those are not the
they're the
voices
main,
that we hear. We hear the extremists all the time, and we see
well,
the extremists
I
supporting each other
understand this,
all the
but
time. We
but
don't
the thing
hear
is,
voices like
why
yours.
why don't you hear about an
Oh, that's my
organization like
question.
Nahdlatul
That's
Ulama?
exactly what I'm
Because
asking you.
Nahdlatul Ulama is a huge organization and they are not quiet. You know, they are the main Muslim organization in Indonesia, which at least three-quarters of the Muslim population there actually follow. And
So have they
they've
released
also
any,
got
have they done
branching.
anything? Have they done anything to speak up against the extremism that's going on right now? Have they said anything against
They've done
Hamas, for
lots.
example?
They've done lots. I mean, they were actually an organization that, you know, like the word kufr or calling people kafir, they actually made
Hmm.
a fatwa that you mustn't do that in modern societies. Because in a modern society, we're all citizens. And like the Prophet set up the Constitution of Medina, and everybody in Medina was a citizen, signed on to that, be it with the terminology of the time, but that was what was understood. Then it's like in modern societies, we're citizens with rights and responsibilities. So whether a person follows Islam as their faith or Christianity, or they're an atheist or whatever they are, they're still a citizen with rights and responsibilities and should be treated as such. And as that is the case, then you shouldn't use the term kafir to refer to them, irrespective of their beliefs. And this is, so many sheikhs in Indonesia, a huge number of people, they voted on this at one of their major conferences. Now, why wasn't that reported in the media? I mean, I went to a conference in Iraq in 2019, which was on human rights, held at the shrine of Imam Hussein, and had Sunni and Shia ulama there. This was never reported in any international media. Why not? It was a conference on human rights by scholars from across the board. So I think there is, maybe Muslims can be doing more. I'm not disputing that. These problems are serious problems and we need to address them. We need to do more. But at the same time, there does seem to be a problem in how things are being reported. And one has to question that too, because I do know of a lot of great initiatives that are going on. I was in Canada, for instance, in November, and I spoke out against the Islamism and against radicalization, because I'm also the UK director of the Global Imams Council. And yet, I mean, that was in the Canadian Parliament, in the same room that your Prime Minister speaks to the country from. That's there. You can go and check it.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a big difference between Muslims together, amongst themselves. Those kinds of things will probably not get reported. But if these large Muslim organizations, for example, all came out, and, for example, condemned those two nurses for what they had done, we would have heard about that. That would have been in the news, but we didn't. Instead, we heard from the Muslim organizations that were supporting these two nurses.
It is,
So
and
maybe what you're
I share
talking.
your concern about 60 organizations, even if they're small organizations. The fact that there are 60 of them that were supporting nurses. I mean, if they've been tried and convicted of this, I'm not sure the exact details of the case, but if they've been tried and convicted of these crimes, then that is quite frightening. And all those organizations should be reprimanded for what they actually are supporting.
Okay, great. What are your personal views on the Hamas and Israel situation?
Well, obviously, the situation there is one that's very complicated, but what isn't complicated is that what happened on October the 7th was a terrorist attack that attacked a peaceful concert. People were there, and it was a peace concert that was actually, a lot of the people there wanted peace with Gaza. I mean, the tragedy of it is just unbelievable. And what a lot of people don't know is there was also Israeli Muslims that were killed that day. And they were killed quicker than other people because, of course, they were seen as worse than anyone. But they were Muslims. They're probably quite religious and devout Muslims that were killed just because they happened to be Israelis. It is really tragic. The mindset of Hamas is deeply troubling. Before this whole thing happened, actually, back in, gosh, it's been a couple of years, hasn't it? That same year that October the 7th happened, earlier in the year, back in March, I put out a fatwa that the Global Imams Council put out. And that fatwa was actually against Hamas because of the way that they treat the Palestinians. Not because even of what they do to Israel, but because of the oppression that they do to Palestinians and that they are unfit for government. And this was an opinion of a number of scholars who were behind that fatwa. So, I mean, it's a deeply complicated situation, but what isn't complicated is the injustices. And the injustices need to be addressed. And I hope that we get some good leadership come from the Palestinian community there so that they can have a good future side by side with Israel. Israel is a state. It exists. It's existed for 3/4 of a century, and any Muslims that are denying that are living in a delusion, and anybody else, because it exists and they built something. What we need is the Palestinians to be supported to be able to build something themselves, and the right Palestinians, not terrorist organizations, but people that are actually constructive and want to build a good future.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. Okay, thank you so much, Paul. So we're going to open it up to questions and comments from people who are here, and we're going to start with you, Cindy.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you very much for being here today. And I was wondering if you could please address the concept of dhimmi as it relates to Jews, Christians, and others like Hindus, especially in the context of October 7th, the Israel-Hamas war, Islamic terror in Africa, and other worldwide conflicts, because it seems to me, as a non-Muslim, that there are multiple layers. There's the level of, you know, anti-Semitism, maybe, conflicts with Jews from a religious standpoint or something like that. But it seems like there is something inherent in, this concept of dhimmi and achieving my understanding of Dar al-Islam, spreading Islam, and that there's this superiority of Muslims over other people. And I really want to know what you think can be done about that in terms of, worldwide conflicts that seem to be, people saying that we have to spread Islam specifically.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate your question and your concern on this subject. From what I understand, the concept of dhimmi originally came about because the Muslims paid the zakat, uh, which is like an obligatory form of almsgiving. And there was Jewish and Christian citizens within the Muslim society, and they paid a dhimmi. But then, of course, later on, this was used by Muslim leaders to then make that more than what it should be and to oppress those communities. And we can't shy away from it. There were Muslim leaders who didn't treat people in the way they should have done. I think Nahdlatul Ulama and some of the Muslim organizations today have the right idea on this, that we should relegate this to the past, that we should go with the modern concept of citizenship because we're all citizens in modern societies. We all pay tax. We should go on that concept because that establishes more justice. And in the Quran, there is a principle of establishing justice. If you are oppressing a certain group within society, whether that community be Jewish or whether that community be Christian or any other community within the society, you are establishing injustice, which goes against a very core Quranic tenet. So it's something that's how I see it. It should be addressed. Um, I am aware there are going to be those that do, and there are going to be those that don't. But I'm with those that do believe it should be addressed in that way.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you, Paul. Mars, you're next.
Thank you. Hi, Paul. I have a
I
question for you regarding the theology. I admit to having a little bit of trouble too with what you discussed earlier in this podcast. And one of the my concerns, I can explain it this way. Just this past weekend, I was entertaining a kid who I believe grew up in a fundamentalist Christian household, and our conversation somehow turned to the topic of religion. Um, he claims to have read the book from beginning to end and claims that the Bible itself is a book that's meant to be read as a book of peace, a book of love, etc., etc. But I've read the Bible, several chapters of it myself, and I've studied it, and like several of the verses inside there regarding like slavery, misogyny, and homophobia, especially. I don't see how that book can be read in that fashion and how he could interpret it in that particular fashion. I mean, if we look at the United States today, there's still quite a bit of homophobia going on, and I think if we're being perfectly honest, a lot of it is perpetrated because of that aspect of Christianity that's carried over to the modern day. Looking at Islam, I am much more inclined to agree with Yasmin on the state of that religion. So I don't see how the books of the big three, as I put them, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, can be interpreted in a more holistic aspect. Can you explain your permission? Can you explain your position?
Yeah, I share your concern on this as well. I mean, a good friend of mine, Imam Hendricks, was killed recently in South Africa. As far as I'm aware, we still don't know who perpetrated the crime. but I mean, it's possible they could have been Muslim. And if they, whoever they were, I mean, I hope they are caught and met with the full force of the law. But I mean, it's absolutely appalling. I mean, he was a very good man, and he explained to me a certain reading of how you can read the verses in the Quran about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and how this wasn't really about homosexuality, although it's interpreted by a lot of people to be that. So, and his reading made more sense to me, and it was more scholarly than some other people's reading of those verses, because he didn't just read the verses, he went into the whole history of the situation. Yeah, it is deeply troubling. And of course, all of these holy books, they are products of their times. And we are probably living, for all the faults of the modern world, we're probably living in a much more understanding time than many previous eras. It is difficult when you look at this, and this is why textual interpretation, understanding the context of things, is really vital. And I do see it as dangerous if people just read things in a very literal manner without having a good teacher who can explain things to them and can explain. It's like even the Quran, you're supposed to understand it within the totality of it. You're not supposed to just take this half verse from it. And even in many of these cases where you look at those verses that are problematic, if you read the verses before and after, it doesn't mean quite what it looks like it means. There's actually more nuance to it. Similarly with the Bible, if you look at the Bible as a whole, there's a lot of things in there. There's history in there. There's religious teachings in there, that some of it is believed to be the words of God, some of it is believed to be the words of prophets. It is actually quite strange that, from my perspective as a Muslim, that there are Christians who believe that the Bible is the word of God from beginning to end, because there are parts of it that clearly read as history and don't read as a God speaking. The Quran itself, I would acknowledge, is still a product of its times, because even though I believe it's a divine revelation, but at the same time, it was speaking to a prophet 1400 years ago in Arabia, and had to speak to that prophet in a language that prophet and his people could understand. But I'm also, one of the things with Islam that appeals to me is the fact that the Prophet did say, carry these words to future generations, and maybe they will understand things better than you. So there are things in the teachings of Islam like this that open it, that you can reform these things. You can interpret these things in different ways, and you're not actually breaking the teachings of Prophet Muhammad by doing that, because the Prophet himself invited people to do that. So I wish people would take that more on board. I know there are Muslims who do, some very large Muslim organizations, some very respected ulama, scholars of Islam. But there are also those that they are interpreting things in a very bad way. And we need to have some quality control on this, I guess you could say, and make sure that the right people are teaching.
I see.
I hope that
Thanks,
answers
Mars.
the question.
Yeah, I mean, I wish more people would think like you, Paul, but the truth is, and you just mentioned Mohsen Hendricks, that's the reality. If you try to interpret the religion differently, then you are putting your life in danger. And whether it was Muslims who killed him or not, I agree with you, it most likely was. If you saw the jubilation online from Muslims throughout the world, that's enough to make your stomach turn and your skin crawl. Like it was repulsive the way they were celebrating his death. So
Absolutely, I agree with you. Those ones that did, but at the same time, there are so many Muslims that didn't see it that way. I mean, when I put this out, there's so many Muslims that were on there giving their condolences, and some of them very conservative Muslims, but they still respected him.
Yeah, but it's dangerous. It's dangerous. I mean, I'm co-founder of an organization called the Clarity Coalition, where we have Muslim reformers, and they are putting their lives on the line to speak up against the, whether it be anti-Semitic or homophobic or whatever, beliefs are in mainstream Islam. They are risking their lives. They're being slurred. They're being called Islamophobic. They're being called,
I've had some things being called certain things myself, and I even
Mm-hmm.
had people threaten me. But the thing
Yeah.
is, it's like from my perspective, it's like that. If you really believe, then you have to do what you believe, irrespective if people come and threaten you and stuff. It's not, from my perspective, it's not coming from, that I'm trying to water down the religion. It's not coming from a perspective of I'm trying to change it as such. I believe that certain things have been misinterpreted, from the outset, or at least from the early days of Islam, not necessarily the very beginning, but certainly like a few hundred years after the Prophet, certain things started to go very wrong in some places. And we seem to be living with the legacy of that. But I think this is also why the way Islam's developed in countries like Indonesia was different from the way it developed in certain countries in the Middle East. There's a different context in the history and how Islam actually reached those places. And that's interesting, to see what worked and what didn't. And they are, in many ways, also quite classical Muslims in Indonesia. They're not people that are like would regard themselves as um, like liberal Muslims or anything. They see themselves as quite orthodox Muslims. But the way that they've interpreted many things, which is in line with their local culture, and they actually take this from the Prophet. They take this from their early scholars. It's not something that they believe that they're innovating in a way which is outside the parameters of Islam. So, yeah, I take that on board.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you. And it's nice to see these changes, but I'm really concerned with the fact that the mainstream Muslims really do value sort of what you refer like the way Arabs practice the religion. They view that as the more authentic Islam. And they will, you even have Somalis and Pakistanis claiming that they are Arab because they want to believe that they are closer to Islam if they are going to be Arabs, you know?
In the case of some
And
individuals, they seem to think they're more Arabic than the Arabs. I mean,
that's right.
they would do a good service to themselves if they had a look at what the UAE is doing at the moment, for instance.
Hmm.
Even Saudi Arabia is instituting quite uh, significant reforms from where they
Yeah.
were a few decades ago. And yet, if you actually speak to them, they themselves will say that they believe they're returning to a form of Islam that's more authentic to what it was originally, rather than what was introduced under the Wahhabis.
Hmm.
So, which is
Yeah. I
interesting.
mean, it is interesting, but speaking of Saudi Arabia, they're the ones that did this. They spread Wahhabism across the world, and now they're
Yeah.
like, JK, let's pull it back. That was a bad mistake.
It's a change of
Um,
leadership, isn't it? Well, I'm not going to blame the
yeah,
people that are doing that now for mistakes
yeah,
that
but
happened
it's,
in the
the
past.
damage has
But I
been
certainly
done,
hear
right?
you,
Across the
because I mean I'm
planet.
British, and I
Yes.
I know the impact that it's had on my own society, and even amongst the diaspora communities that we've got in the UK, and how what probably their grandparents it would be now, how they are, and then how their grandchildren are, and how they're very different interpretations of Islam. The interpretation that in many cases the grandparents had was much more easygoing, much more relaxed, much more friendly. They're still getting it from the Quran and their interpretation from the books, but they were very amiable. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, of course, there's a lot of young people who are as well, but there is that element. I don't believe it's the mainstream, but it's certainly a loud element that they have very radical views. And these are quite different from those of their grandparents. And where did they get those from? And I know where it comes from. It is worrying, and we have to change that. I mean, no society can have harmony and peace if we have those sorts of attitudes. Um,
No, I completely agree with you. And yeah, I do see what you're saying. I also wanted to say about Saudi Arabia too, though, in full disclosure here, we have to be honest about the country as a whole. They still have the guardianship laws that keep women as perpetual dependents for their whole lives. They still kill people for renouncing the religion of Islam. They still kill homosexuals. So, they are not some beacon of human rights by any stretch of the
I never
imagination.
said that. I never
No,
said
I'm
that
not saying
they're
you
there
said that
yet,
they
but
are. I
but I'm
I know
heartened
you
to
didn't
see
say
where they're
that, but
going. That's what I
I would
said.
just like to
Yeah.
say that, yeah, they are making some headway, especially when it comes to pushing back against Islamists, and pushing back against anti-Semites as well. So that's good to see, and obviously in the UAE as well. And that's probably for financial reasons, but I don't care. It doesn't matter. As long as we're moving forward, humanity is progressing. We're looking towards peace and prosperity versus, perpetual hate and perpetual violence. Sarah, you're next.
Hi, Paul. So
Yeah.
I have a question for you because you've been spending the past hour talking about how that's not the real Islam. This is the real Islam. I read it differently. You're not reading it correctly. We have to change the way we read the book. I was born and raised in Iran. You just very easily dismissed 40 million Iranian women who have been subjugated and dehumanized for the past 45 years. You just said that Afghanistan is not the real Islam. Nobody cares. Millions of girls in Afghanistan have not had access to education for the past 3 years. And this rhetoric that, oh, that's not the real Islam. I'm the real Islam. Do you realize how dismissive and how dehumanizing that is? Do you understand that you are normalizing our oppression? Or is that just you don't care at this point? Because I've been sitting here trying to be very respectful in my question, and I have like 60 different questions to ask you. But at this point, I want to know what you have done for women like me, for women like Mahsa Amini, who's in that painting behind Yasmine right now, who was murdered because of her improper hijab. You talk about modesty on your social media. Do you understand how dehumanizing that is to women? Do you understand how misogynistic the whole religion is? You can sit here and say, that's not the real religion. I am suffering
I
from
hear you.
Islamo trauma.
Mm.
I have to spend the rest of my life trying to put my brain back together. Because the religion that you're defending and you're saying that that's not the real thing, that has ruined our lives. Do you understand how you're normalizing this oppression? Do you understand how horribly patronizing this whole conversation has been for the past hour?
It's not my intention to be patronizing. So what I'm saying is that I recognize, firstly, the inhumanity that has been meted out. I've highlighted a lot of these things myself. They do deeply concern me. I've never been someone who goes out there, by the way, who tells women how to dress. I've often picked people up on that when people have done that because I don't agree with it. It's not appropriate. It's wrong. It's not my body. So who am I to say how someone else should dress? Or even another man. It's up to them. It's how they should dress.
But your social media is like I've seen your social media post, all the AI women who are in hijab.
If you notice, there's a mixture, and I've mixed it up deliberately.
And you're looking down on the women who are not wearing hijab.
No, I'm not.
You have one
that's
picture
putting
of a
words in my-
woman in hijab and then one picture of women in a group with men, and you're talking about modesty and morality and how your friends. I'm not going to get into details. That's irrelevant. The point is that you said that's not the real Islam. They are Islamist. You can call them the baboons of Earth.
Well,
They are enslaving us. They are dehumanizing us, and you're normalizing it.
Firstly, they are enslaving you and they are dehumanizing you. I agree with you. What I don't agree with is that I'm normalizing it because I speak out against this. I question it myself.
You didn't. You
I
said it's not
condemn
the real
Islamism.
Islam. You just said that's Islamism. It's not Islam. It's not Muslims.
It is Islamism. That's a fact.
So it's not the
Because
real. This is not. So you're just giving it a different name.
They themselves call themselves Islamists. They
They
themselves
can call
Islamiyah.
themselves baboons,
It's a
as I said.
political
I don't
movement.
care. It's the same book. I grew up memorizing that book. That you're just saying we should read it differently. A man was executed in Iran for having said that nobody can live in the body of a veil. So this is an allegory in the book. They executed him in Iran for
It's
trying to just.
It's wrong. I'm not.
So don't sit here
How am
and
I
say
defending
that.
that?
You're defending
When
it because you're saying that's not the real Islam. We are the real Islam. Normal people are the real Islam. When you're calling them Islamists and you're creating this barrier between yourselves and them, and you're saying it's not my dirty laundry and I'm not taking responsibility for it,
I'm
you
not
are
saying
making
that
it
at
normal.
all. I'm not saying that at all. I said there are 1.61 billion Muslims in the world. Do you think 1.61 billion Muslims all follow the same exact religion?
Enough of them
I know
marry
it's all. I know it's
children
all
for
called
it to be a
Islam.
problem in Islam.
I mean,
Enough
look.
of them
Okay,
have committed honor killing for it to be a problem in Islam. Enough of them force women into hijab and look at us as half humans with half brains.
and
I
they're
have a
wrong.
male guardian. I'm 42 years old. I'm sorry, I don't want to curse, but I'm 42 years old and I have a male guardian.
And that's outrageous.
So why would you sit here and say that's Islamist? That's not us. Instead of saying that, why don't you actually go to Iran and try to face them? Let's see what happens to you if you do that. Let's see if you can come out alive if you do that.
You know, you have to pick your battles carefully, and you don't do things which.
Please don't tell me how to fight my oppressors, okay? Thank
I'm
you.
not saying you. I'm
That's
meaning me.
exactly what
You
you're
know.
doing.
Well, that's. I'm not saying that. You put words into my mouth.
Paul, it is really hurtful when you when you do the deflection that you're doing, when we're telling you how Islam and how Muslims dehumanize us and how tyrannical they are. And your
I've
response
acknowledged
is,
that.
but that's them. That's not the real Islam. But the truth is, you are the minority. You are the very small minority. You are not the one
Who
with power.
whitewashes the majority at the same time. I apologize. Thank you, Yasmine. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I'm sorry if that's how you've interpreted anything which I've said, because I have spoke out quite strongly, and I've been consistently doing that for the past 15 years against people who are doing these things. All I'm highlighting is that, yes, I don't know. Ultimately, I don't know exactly, none of us know exactly how many people are representing this aspect or that aspect. But what we do know is that there are some large organizations who do not hold these views, who do not support that kind of
There
thing.
are
It's
42
irrelevant to us.
million women in Iran who are affected. I don't care how many Muslim men stand up and say, I don't believe in this. I don't care how many people you talk with personally. For as long as this is systemic, girls that are 9 years old can be married off in Iraq now. That's based on Sharia law. It is disgusting, but
So
it's
I'll
the
put it
fact
to you
of
this
our
way, Paul.
lives.
When you say that's none of my business, that's them over there, that's the Islamists.
I never said that's none of my business.
Right. Okay. Well, when you say
what
that's
point
not
did I say
me,
that?
that's not what I believe. That's what you're saying. You're saying that's not me, that's not what I believe, that's them over there, right? So what you're doing now is you're just deflecting from it and saying, well, that's not something that we're going to address. But what we're asking you, and what I hear Sarah trying to say to you is okay.
That's not what I said,
So
because I
if I
have
can
been
just
addressing
express,
it. I've agreed with you on a number of these things.
I understand that you, on a personal level, disagree with a lot of these things. But what we're saying to you is that instead of deflecting and saying, those are Islamists, those are terrorists, those are X, Y, Z, why aren't you fighting them? Fight for this Islam that you have in your mind. Fight for this.
Isn't that what we're doing?
I don't know. Well, I mean, that's what we're asking. If you are the real Muslims and they are the fake Muslims, then we don't see the Muslims like you standing up against this terror and abuse and violence and dehumanization and discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. I see you saying, that's not me, that's them, that's not the real Muslims.
I did not say those particular words, because the thing is, it's like Iran is a country. If Iran as a country is doing stuff, we can speak out against it, we can condemn it. Even I mean, it's their political institution that's doing that. I'm not
That's the
saying
religion in
I
that's not Iran. I apologize for cutting you
please,
off. There's a
yeah,
difference between Iran and the Islamic regime. And we make it very clear. You're talking about the Islamic regime, not Iran. Iran is right now hostage to your religion. So
yeah.
do not tell us
I'm
that it's Iran. It is political Islamic regime in Iran you're
well, that's
talking
what I
about.
just said. I actually just said it's the political regime.
No, you just
That's
said
what
it's
it.
Iran. It's a political system. That's not a political system. That's the political religious system that has taken Iran hostage. There's a huge difference.
Okay,
This could be just
that's
a
what I'm
mental
referring to.
gymnastics for you, and you can just do
Uh,
an intellectual exercise here. This is
that's
our
not my
trauma. This is
intention.
our daily lives.
I know it's deeply, deeply troubling. But the thing is, it's like, I mean, what can we do? I mean, a country, if a country decides, and I'm not saying that the people themselves are deciding, but if the people, if those people have got the power over the country at the moment, how do you unseat them? How do you unseat them from that? If I go to Iran and tell them, okay, what you're doing is wrong, even if I took 100,000 people with me and told them that, is that going to change their country? Is that going to change their religious political system that they've implemented? Either they are unseated, either they are toppled by their own people, or they abolish it themselves. But at the moment, they have the hands of power on that system. But then if you look at another country like Indonesia, Indonesia is controlled by a different
Right.
group
So
of
we're not going
people.
to do that
They have a
again.
different.
Yeah, so it's
Do you
really it's
understand what
not
I'm saying?
helpful.
It's
I understand what you're saying, but it's not helpful for you to sit here and say that you are run one of the largest and oldest Muslim organizations in Britain, and then to say, what can we do if Muslims are doing bad things?
no, what we
It's up
can
to you.
do.
This is your this
I
is you
understand.
converted
What we
to
can
this
do.
religion. You chose
We
this
can.
job.
Mm. What we can do is we can advocate, we can speak out, we can condemn. But the thing is, I mean, unless we take an army in there and invade the country, I mean, we can't change that. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be the most helpful thing either for the ordinary Iranian people. Um, but
We don't want
I
you to invade the country. We want you not to sit here and say, those are Islamists. Those are not real Muslims. We are the real Muslims. There are 2 billion of us, and this is a small country that has like 80 million people in it, us are not the real Muslims. I'm sorry, Yasmin, I keep cutting
I,
you off, but because we go back to Iran, and that's really actually hurting that you sit here from the very beginning, very clearly saying, those are Islamists. Iran and Afghanistan are Islamists.
look, I am
And
not
not talk
saying.
about it, and not talk, and then you don't talk about the male guardianship laws in Saudi Arabia. You don't want to talk about the child marriage in Iraq. You don't want to talk
Mm,
about the Taliban. You don't want to talk about ISIS.
I
You don't
did
want to
talk
talk
about
about
the
the Islamic.
Taliban. Mm,
No, you just dismiss them all as not being real Muslims. We don't want you to invade them. How
mm.
many times have you talked about Masa Amini in the past 2 years, Paul? Do you even know who she is?
Yeah, I do know who she
How
is,
many
but
times have you talked about woman life freedom movement in Iran? How many times have you talked about abolishing male guardianship laws? How many times have you brought up hijab as being oppressive and dehumanizing to women?
I have actually spoken up about the hijab, not necessarily exactly how you would, but I have actually pointed out the problems with the way some people present this, and that you shouldn't be judging people. I do weekly podcasts, and I've often picked up on some of these issues. But I mean, by all means, just assume what you want. I mean, that's not helpful either, you know.
I
I'm
think
going to mute
to be
myself. Thank you,
yeah.
Yasmin. Sorry.
Mm.
It's really, I think it's really difficult for somebody who's born and raised in the United Kingdom, who has never lived in an Islamic regime. You didn't grow up in a Muslim family. You didn't grow up in a Muslim community. You're almost like cosplaying Muslim for the past 25 years. You didn't get to really experience it. And so I don't think you can even understand how patronizing and insulting and cruel. It's literally cruel right now for you to act as if like these kinds of things are like, separate from Islam. They're not separate from Islam, Paul. That is what Islam is. That is how we live. That is how Muslim women have to live. Whether we are in Afghanistan, whether we are in Iran, whether we are in Canada, America, Sweden, Italy, France, this is our life. This is how we have to survive, right? You talked about, Mohsen Hendricks. He was in South Africa. We're not talking about Islamist countries. We're not talking about theocracies. We're talking about Islam. We're talking about Muslims. And we're talking about this being a worldwide problem. And until people like you are willing to admit that, acknowledge that, and speak up against that, then we're only going to continue only hearing the voices of the extremists, and they're always going to be the ones that are going to be the tail that wags the dog, and they're always going to be the ones with the microphones, right? We're never going to get to see you. We don't hear your voices. We don't see you doing anything other than just dismissing those guys and saying, they're not real Muslims. That's not helpful. That's not
I
helpful
have,
at all.
at no point during this conversation have I said that. And you have put words into my mouth.
So go ahead, answer me then.
I have repeatedly condemned these injustices, repeatedly. I take your point. I mean, I am a British man. I live in Britain. I'm not trying to say I'm going to exactly understand what people have experienced who've had a different life. Of course not. But at the same time, you've been very dismissive of my own faith and the fact that this has been very much at the heart of my life for 25 years. That's a quarter of a century. And I do live within Muslim communities in the UK. I do work with Muslims every day from traditional diaspora backgrounds. It's not the same as living the life that you've lived
Of course, it's
or the
not
life
even
that Sarah's lived. Of
close.
course it's not. But the thing is,
It's like having chicken chow mein in New York and saying, oh, I had Chinese food. That's exactly what it sounds like to me.
But to say that I'm cosplaying being a Muslim when I've been a Muslim for 25 years is deeply insulting as well.
I'm saying you will
There's
never
there's
understand
one
what Sarah's saying and what I'm trying to say to you. You're not going to get it. Not only because you're a man, but because you're a British man and because you're a convert. There's so many layers as to you're not empathizing with what we're saying to you. And I'm not getting through to you. So let's just move on. Magda, you're next.
not quite. I am empathizing more than you might realize, but at the same time, I get it. I'm not trying to say that I will fully understand what you've experienced because of course I won't if I've not experienced it myself. But that doesn't mean I'm not empathizing. That doesn't mean I don't care.
Okay,
And
so
to
please
suggest
never
that is,
dismiss things again that,
and if I may clarify a point, when I've called certain groups Islamists, this is because that's what they call themselves. And there is a difference between the way that they interpret Islam and the way that Dar al-Iftar in Egypt interprets Islam, or the way Nahdlatul Ulama interprets Islam. I am not saying that, and all of these Muslim groups themselves differ in their interpretation. It's a religion of, it's a religion of 1.61 billion people. That's a lot of people in a lot of different organizations. They are not all the same. And we
they're
can't
not
just
all
say
the
that they're
same,
all
but
the
the
same.
overwhelming majority of the voices that we hear are the same.
There are some very loud people, and I'm not denying they exist, far from it. They are as much a concern to me as to you, irrespective of our differences in how we've lived our lives. I know if those people become the power that controls everyone, we're all done for, and that's terrible. And that is something that we cannot allow to happen. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't care about these things. And I've been working in this area for 15 years, working on countering extremism and explaining how Islam can be interpreted in a way which is humanitarian, in a way which respects everyone. And this is something that I deeply believe. And I'm not alone in this. My teachers, Sheikh Maulana Sheikh Hisham Kabani, Sheikh Dr. Tyrell Kadri, also Kyai Yahya Khalil, who's in Indonesia, who runs Nahdlatul Ulama. There are a lot of people who don't share this particular perspective on Islam. And that doesn't mean that I'm denying that those people exist or that the evil that they perpetrate or the fact that they are Muslims. I'm not denying that either, but what I'm saying is that the way they are interpreting things, the way they are understanding things, I believe is wrong. And there's a hell of a lot of Muslims who believe that they're wrong. But that doesn't mean that they're not doing it. And it doesn't mean that they themselves don't think that they're right or that they are following Islam. Of course they do. But there are different Islams. It's not all the same Islam. That's the point that I was getting across. Just like there's different Christianities. And, you can't say that it's not a real, like, you can't say the Catholic Church is not real Christianity or the Church of England isn't real Christianity or the Southern Baptist. They're all different. but they're all forms of Christianity. It's the same within the Muslim world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we talk about the terrorists and we talk about the theocracies, you wouldn't ever say those aren't real Muslims. That's not real Islam.
I'm not denying that they're Muslims, and I'm not denying that they're basing it on their interpretation of things which are in the Quran and Hadith. I recognize that, and that is something that needs to be tackled. But so I think this may be something that wasn't understood, but maybe it's a mistake in the way I conveyed myself. I don't know, but definitely I recognize that, and I never denied that throughout this whole conversation.
All right, Magda, go ahead, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can.
And you can see me. Hello, Paul. I'm from the UK as well.
We can't see you, Magda, but we can hear you.
Oh, you can't see me. Oh. Can you see me now?
No.
No.
But that's all right. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Oh dear, I'm sorry for that. I'm trying.
No worries.
So I'm from the UK and I'm not Jewish. My partner is Israeli. And I worked in school in Brighton for many, many years. Just a few months before October 7th, my friend, a teacher who comes from Yemeni Moroccan background, and my partner comes from Yemen as well. So we were sitting at the table, and she said that even though she was growing up in the UK, in her community, the worst humiliation for any person would be to call them a Jew. Then, unfortunately, after October 7th, I've also seen in Brighton a person from a Muslim background supporting Hamas. I've seen lots of anti-Semitism and lots of Muslim people or people from the Muslim background united against Israel, and also seen lots of hate against Jewish people. So I would like to ask, and I must say that I've never been afraid of Islam before, but I'm starting to be afraid now. So my question is there any unity among imams or to address actually Jew hater among people from the Muslim background?
I hear you, and I see this problem in the UK, and it's something which I find deeply, deeply disturbing, and it's something which I've been working on. I know people who are working on it. There is actually an organization called Muslims Against Anti-Semitism that I know people set up.
Yeah.
I know this problem. We have, unfortunately, in the UK, we have a disproportionate amount of people who have been influenced by extremist views, even to the point that we've got people from the UAE, for instance, who have spoken out against the extremism that's in the UK. Now, of course, it's not all Muslims in the UK, but it is a much larger percentage than what it should be. And it is something which I worry about. And it is something which needs to be addressed. I mean, I do my part in that, but the problem is we need something much more robust to address this.
Do you have any idea what can be done?
What can be done is, I do have some ideas, but it's going to need also government intervention. It's going to need, the system to actually step up as well, and not just, it's like some people, they ask the question, why don't Muslims police their own communities? Well, there are people within the Muslim community who are doing what they can, but it's, how can you ask Muslims to police their own communities when we have a police force, when we have the Crown Prosecution Service, when we have laws against this thing in this country, and it should be addressed legally, and people should be protected.
But Paul, I mean more. more not police and government, because that's a separate thing. I mean more Muslim community, because I've heard the podcast where even Muslim people were saying that they are afraid to speak against extremism and in their communities, because they will be told that they are racist or they are Zionists. So I'm thinking more about how it can be brought into, mosques and taught in the mosques. No, I'm not. The government for me is a different thing. I would like more Muslim people to speak up.
Same, I would too. It's something that I encourage and work towards. I think what we need is we need to build a network of more people that are on this wavelength that can actually address this problem. Obviously, one of the things in this country is the way mosques are run as well. A lot of mosques are independent organizations. So if you go to another country like, I will mention Indonesia again because I'm aware of the situation there and how things are run. It's like a lot of mosques in Indonesia are run by either Nahdlatul Ulama or Muhammadiyah. There's these big organizations that they have like an umbrella structure and they control what goes on in those mosques. We don't really have that in the UK. A lot of mosques are independent. There are some organizations that have several mosques under them, and there's so many of these Muslim organizations that have been set up in the UK. So it's almost where do you begin? And it's quite concerning the more that you actually look into this, and I have done, and some of my friends have looked into this for a number of years. Maybe there's some kind of program that can be brought into mosques in like a workshop or something. That's something that could be done. But definitely, but then again, you're going to have the mosques that are probably will welcome that and will work with that, are the ones that are not the problem. And there are good mosques in this country. I mean, I think everybody focuses on the bad one. People don't realize there are a lot of good mosques. But then you set something up like that, it'll probably be the good ones that aren't the problem that will let us set that up and to do that. Whereas the ones that really have problematic views, they're not going to let in people to bring in that kind of program. Unless there was something that came from, that's why I said legislation at government level that actually mandated it. Mm-hmm. That's the reason I mentioned that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Magda.
Thank you.
So Paul, as we wrap up today, I just hope that, what you got from this conversation is the overwhelming expression that we're trying to get to you is that when you do this like interfaith kumbaya, Muslims are lovely people, everything's fine, just ignore those extremists over there. That's not helpful for anybody.
No,
but what we're asking for you to do instead is to push back against the extremists in your community, push back against the anti-Semites, push back against the misogyny, push back against all of these things within your community. Put your efforts into that. You're in the UK. You've got more than enough issues there to keep you busy, rather than playing the interfaith, everything's fine, Muslims are great. Because that is providing cover. That is providing cover for the reality of how most people live under Islam. So that's what we're trying to express to you. Whether you want to do that or not is entirely up to you. But I think that's basically the conclusion of the message that we're all trying to get to you. That's definitely the message that I want to convey to you.
Yasmine, we've actually moved more in that direction over the past few years with the Association of British Muslims. We've deliberately reached out to the communities that have problems with Muslims to try and see what those issues are, to listen to them, to talk to them. It's one of the reasons why I reached out to you, because I do recognize the issues that you mentioned, that you were highlighting when I saw you on the news. And I agreed with you to a large extent. These are things that need addressing, they need resolving. And we're not going to get that through having custard creams and samosas and just saying we all believe in God. That model of interfaith is out the window, and it should be. I mean, certainly it's not the one that we're interested in indulging in. It's not going to get us anywhere.
I look forward to seeing your face on the news and in newspapers. I look forward to hearing your voice. I hope you stay safe as you do that, because you know that's going to be very dangerous. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to be angry at you for advocating for peace, and, you know, pushing back against the misogyny, or pushing back against the anti-Semitism, or supporting gay imams. So I guess what I say to you is, you know, best of luck. And I hope that there are a lot of Muslim people behind you, and I hope to hear their voices. And I hope to, you know, read in the paper one time that there are 60 Muslim organizations speaking up against anti-Semites instead of speaking up in support of them. That's the future that I think you and I both want to see. So before we conclude this, I just want to make sure that you get the last word, that you've had an opportunity to say everything you want to say.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me onto this, Yasmine. It's you okay? Thank you for inviting me onto your podcast, and I appreciate the hard questions. I'm glad you raised them, and you, Sarah, as well. And don't think I don't empathize. I do. I'm deeply concerned about the same things that you're concerned about. Obviously, my views will differ somewhat because I am a Muslim. I do believe in my faith, and this is what, you know, motivates me. But it also motivates me to deal with the issues which you've highlighted. So I will not just pray, I will keep working towards that kind of a world where we can all be safe and happy and well. And it's not an easy thing to do, but it's something that we've all got to do what we can to do, because it's, as I mentioned earlier about citizenship, everybody talks about their rights these days. I remember Shaykh Hisham many years ago, he highlighted this. He says people always want their rights, they talk about their rights, but rights come with responsibilities, and we all have a responsibility. Anybody who wants to benefit from their rights here. And we've had people that come to this country, they're talking about human rights when it suits them. And then as soon as it doesn't suit them, they switch off and start condemning people and saying terrible things. No, if you want human rights, you have to respect everybody else's human rights. Everybody has a human right. And this is something that we need to return back to. And I believe it has at least some Islamic inspiration in that, through Imam Ali, who highlighted human rights. There is a precedent for it. But, you know, I mean, this is what we need. We need people to respect everybody and not going around and condemning people for being who they are and not doing any harm. That's unacceptable. And certainly, like marrying little girls and doing these terrible things, this has got to stop. I don't want to see that in the world.
Wonderful. Did you have an opportunity to speak up against what's happening in Iraq? As Sarah mentioned, the child marriage being clawed back from 18 down to 9. Is that one of the things that you guys are focusing on pushing back against?
That is something which I can't stand. It's something which I have spoken up on over the years, even before Iraq, you know, brought this in. And I've spoken out against what's happening in Afghanistan. I do that. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, there's a lot of issues in the UK. There's a lot of things which we have to address. And also, I am a Muslim chaplain. I'm an imam. So a lot of my content, it will be just general spiritual guidance for the people who follow me. And they need that, you know, they benefit from that. But it doesn't mean that I don't speak out against these issues as well. And we can do more, you know. I encourage people to do more.
Good. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. And you can follow Paul on Instagram. He'll be tagged when we post this video. And he's also on Twitter. And can you remind us again, Paul, what is the name of the organization that you are running?
The Association of British Muslims.
The Association of British Muslims. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
After hearing all that, you might be left wondering, what can I do? How can I help? Well, this is why I created a nonprofit called Free Hearts, Free Minds. We are the only organization dedicated exclusively to helping these free thinkers. We empower them with our programs and supportive community, lifting them up so they can heal, speak out, and begin to make positive changes, not just in their own lives, but within the broader community around them. If this is a cause that resonates with you and you want to make a difference, one way to do that is by donating to Free Hearts, Free Minds. Because not enough people care about this cause, we need people like you to help fuel this change. You can donate via our website, freeheartsfreeminds.com. Thank you. Every dollar you donate makes a difference.